It is a genuine privilege and absolute pleasure to have Salim Ismail here all the way from the United States in Dubai, looking at some of the key developments that are taking place in this region and looking at some of the big meta trends that are affecting the whole world at this point in time. The world's a bit messed up, but within this crazy environment, there is a lot of abundance and opportunity, and he is the master of abundance. Salim, welcome. Good to see you here.
Nice to be here.
Salim, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I'm the author of Exponential Organizations, and we built a global community around that of consultants and entrepreneurs and innovators and technologists. That's now 18,000 people in 130 countries. And we focus on not just digital transformation, but exponential transformation. Before that, I was the founding CEO of Singularity University, and I built that out and ran most of the programs for about 7 years. And before that, I was the head of innovation at Yahoo, where I learned the fundamental lesson that's kind of driving a lot of our thinking, which is you try anything disruptive in a legacy environment and the immune system attacks you. And now you're stuck in a political fight and not dealing in evidentiary outcomes. And so how do we solve for that is almost all of the work we've been doing for the last few years now.
Latching on to the immune system conversation, this is the primary thing that we see on most boards, with CEOs and C-level teams. Can you just drill deeper into that and what it is and what are the things we need to do to address it?
Sure. So all of our organizations are architected for efficiency and for predictability, right? You're trying to deliver the same widget in 1,000 locations for the same price. And that's completely antithetical to disruptive innovation. If you're doing a business model that's highly efficient and it's operating for decades, when you come at it from something completely new, like the Tesla for the car industry, literally gets spit out. Can't handle it, not invented here, they don't understand it, it can't possibly work, etc. And we are very bad in legacy environments at adopting disruptive ideas. Yet, because of all the breakthrough technologies, 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time, the world is now being driven by disruptive innovation. And that's the higher order bit. And therefore our legacy organizations, and even more importantly, our institutions, need to be able to absorb and deal and juxtapose with disruptive ideas in a much more constructive way.
I think we understand the principle of this, but how do we loosen this immune system? What are the little techniques and methodologies that you might be using, perhaps through your sprint method or others, to sort of soften this immune system to give us sort of space for new ideas and technologies to come through?
Yeah, so we've been working for now close to a decade in developing tool sets for this. Because coming out of Singularity University, my conclusion was if we cannot solve this immune system problem, it doesn't matter what the breakthroughs are, we can't implement them, right? In most legacy organizations, when you try anything disruptive, the general default answer is no. And we're able to turn that from a no to a yes. And if you can do that, then you now allow and unleash a whole amount of value creation at a very profound level. So we run a 10-week engagement inside a big company that is able to move leadership, culture, and management thinking 3 years ahead in that 10-week period. We piloted it with Procter & Gamble. We've now done it 60 times around the world, here in the region with DIWA, with EMAR, with ALEC, the construction company, and probably many others over time.
During COVID, all of us obviously went through a massive, reset of our lives. But what used to take decades now is happening in months and sometimes even in weeks in terms of change and transformation and acceptance. What are the amazing new things from your perspective are coming out from this COVID aftermath as we look into the future?
Well, I think that's most easily answered with looking at the technology breakthroughs. What COVID did was allow us to adopt some of these new ideas. But what's happening is we now have a dozen technologies that are doubling very steadily. In neuroscience, the resolution at which we can image the brain is doubling every year, right? Let me just drill into neuroscience for a second. Because we can image the brain now in real time, now we can take psychedelics and take a microdose, and we can actually spot what neural circuit is it amplifying or depressing as you take it. In the 60s, when they first tested LSD, and they were just chucking it down, they had no idea, right? Now we know exactly that a 100 milligram dose of mushrooms does this to you and does this to this neural circuit, etc. And we've got the dosages and the effects completely mapped out. Now you have a feedback loop. Now we can do some amazing things. So they're now treating systemic depression, PTSD with one treatment of these psychedelics and microdoses. So just a small example of the incredible power that comes from new ways of thinking and adopting some of the new capabilities. You take AI and look at the generative art that's coming from the AI world, right? Stable Diffusion, actually created with one of our community members, is now transforming and open sourcing that entire domain. Throughout human history, advanced technologies always cost a lot. Mm-hmm. And only a government or a big corporate lab could afford to do R&D, launch new products and services. Today, for the first time in human history, advanced technologies are very cheap. Solar energy is cheap, sensors are cheap, the blockchain is open source and free. And so now you're seeing an explosion of disruptive innovation anywhere in the world because the cost of entry is so low. The only thing that prevents you from doing something radical now is mindset. So I think there's a massive tectonic shift happening, and we're right in the middle of that. And you could frame that in a number of ways. One is scarcity to abundance, right? Think about the idea that for 10,000 years, every business in the world was selling scarcity. Yeah. If you didn't have scarcity, you pretty much didn't have a business. Now we're seeing new business models. Essentially, the basis of exponential organizations are business models around an abundance economy. Uber is tapping into an abundance of cars lying around. Airbnb is tapping into an abundance of extra bedrooms lying around. And we're finding business models around abundance for the first time in human history. The challenge is all of our institutions are designed to navigate the world in a scarcity-based mindset. And so our institutions literally can't cope with all of this change. And so I think the biggest work to be done by leaders around the world is how do we update our institutions for the 21st century rather than the goddamn 15th century.
If you look at the geopolitical things that are going on, Russia, Ukraine, this part of the world, North Asia, from your future lens, particularly looking at governments, businesses and technology and the nexus of all of that, how do you see this geopolitical structure impacting us on a day-to-day basis? Is it going to change our lives as we know it, or are there just little political chess moves that are going on?
So I think there's two countervailing forces. At the macro level, we're seeing a complete transformation of global geopolitics, right? So you're seeing the China battle with Taiwan or Ukraine versus Russia, and that's having a huge effect, gas prices, etc. By the way, note that the reason Russia's invading Ukraine now is that they're very reliant on oil prices, and they need oil prices high to make the economy stable. In a few years, with the advent of solar, oil prices will drop to $15-ish a barrel and won't change from that because we have so much solar. So Russia has to invade now. They won't have any currency left in a few years to do it. If you look at it from that perspective, then you go, oh, wow, that makes complete sense. And I think that's the kind of thing that's playing out around the world.
A philosophical question. I start most of my presentations with the word trust, very closely followed with truth and ethics. And that's one vector. And the other one is empathy and values. And I basically state philosophically and practically is that without trust, truth, and ethics on the one side, AI and machine learning and stuff like that will be monstrous. And without empathy and values, what's the world like?
Jerry Mikulski, one of our community members, framed this the best I've ever seen. He said, scarcity equals abundance minus trust. Right, so it's like one of those you have to think about it for an hour to start off with. Well, if we can figure out how to scale trust, then you deliver abundance, right? And now with technologies like blockchain and others, we can actually scale trust in a way that we could never do before. So I think that's an incredibly exciting development with this. We can have now trustless systems. I can do a blockchain transaction. I don't have to care how ethical or not you are. We can do the transaction in a clean way. So that affords that'll open up a whole new world of different types of applications that will be very, very powerful. I'm less worried about AI and ethics, etc., because technology, the big challenge with technology since the beginning of time is how do you extract the promise without the peril? How do you guard that is the really challenged part. How do you navigate that? And if we can, as we're delivering the world to abundance, then the need for war goes away, right? What are you fighting over? If everybody has adequate water, energy, food, etc., there's nothing to fight over. So hopefully that transition obviates the need and absolves us from the dynamics that have driven from the past, renders all geopolitics pretty much useless and irrelevant. And that's the future I think we have to go down. In the beginning of the pandemic, we did this huge event that you participated in. Do we have a Mad Max world or a Star Trek world? We have those two, and the politicians are clearly driving us down the Mad Max world. Take Donald Trump, for example. And yet we have the Star Trek world there ready for us. We just have to grab it and implement it.
Now, when I talk about trust, we are losing trust in so many of our institutions in the world, whether it's the Supreme Court or the Congress on the one hand, whether it's large corporations and the way they're operating, and literally calibrating all the way down. We are losing trust around us.
Yes.
How do we rebuild that trust back? Technology is fine, Salim. I mean, yes, blockchain's there and digital currencies are there. We'll get to that in a second. But how do we rebuild that trust in institutions or have different institutions?
I think the answer is different institutions. And if you follow the Buckminster-Fuller approach of saying you can't ever solve the existing system, you have to have new systems that make the old ones irrelevant, that's the path to go down, right? Take education. All our education systems are designed to take a young child, train them through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. We have no idea what a job looks like in 5 years. What are we teaching them? Our 19th century, 18th century classrooms that are still being used are completely out of date. And yet when you try and update education, God help you, the immune system is unbelievably strong. We need completely new models for things like education, healthcare, legal systems, etc. And so the work I think that we have to do is build those new institutions in a way that have trust embedded deeply into them. That includes transparency, clean environments that are non-corrupt, etc. And we now have that capability. So I tend to be very optimistic about that. It's not clear what the path is to get there. For example, how do you trust a news article? Is there some sort of crowdsourced vetting verification, right? It's clear that you need things like investigative journalism to have governments and society work properly. Otherwise, you have nothing to shine sunlight on dark patterns. I'm less worried about AI and ethics, etc., because technology, the big challenge with technology since the beginning of time is how do you extract the promise without the peril? Right? I can use fire to heat my house and I can use it to burn down your house. Which do I pick? We've actually done a pretty good job over the centuries of delivering promise from technology, less so the peril. Let's also note that technology is a major driver of progress in the world. Right. In fact, if you listen to Ray Kurzweil, it's the only major driver of progress we've ever seen. Now we have a dozen technologies doubling exponentially. That's an incredibly opportunistic and optimistic view we can bring to the world. How do you guard that is the really challenged part. How do you navigate that? And if we can, as we're delivering the world to abundance, then the need for war goes away. Right? What are you fighting over? If everybody has adequate water, energy, food, etc., there's nothing to fight over. So hopefully that transition obviates the need and absolves us from the dynamics that have driven from the past, renders all geopolitics pretty much useless and irrelevant. And that's the future I think we have to go down. In the beginning of the pandemic, we did this huge event that you participated in. Do we have a Mad Max world or a Star Trek world? We have those two, and the politicians are clearly driving us down the Mad Max world. Take Donald Trump, for example. And yet we have the Star Trek world there ready for us. We just have to grab it and implement it. It's happening naturally. It's slow. You can have a trickle, and then a waterfall of this. I'll give you an example. You have GitHub, which is an open platform for software developers to collaborate. And I can rate your code and you can rate my code. And there's a Yelp style rating for how good is your code versus my code. Well, it turns out today, your salary as a software developer in Silicon Valley has no correlation to the university you went to, the degree you got, or the grades you got. It's 100% what is your GitHub rating. So a transparent, open, meritocratic score is replacing the traditional credentialing given by universities and so on. Okay? Now that will start to happen in other domains. That'll start to happen in plumbing and in medicine and in legal work and healthcare work and all sorts of other types of work areas where we can apply this new model to these different areas. My son is 11. I'm desperately hoping the university model breaks by the time he becomes 18. In fact, I'm counting on it. Okay? I'll give you one other way I think about this, which is that throughout human history, we've been doing education and training from the supply side. Go become a banker, become a finance person, become an engineer, become a doctor, become a lawyer, and then you get deep skills in that domain and you get an education, and then you try and sell those skills in the marketplace, and you hope that there's enough of a job market to apply those skills. Well, that's been the supply side of it. What's happening now is we're shifting to the demand side, right? You pick your passion that you want to go after, and then you get the training and education that helps you solve your passion. This is where MTP comes in so powerfully. And if somebody wants to be a great race car driver, then they go pick up the skills for that. And it's just as the simplest example of people of our generation or our parents. Ask anybody that is moaning about education, go, how much of your university education did you actually use in the workplace?
Correct. Yeah.
And the answer is like 1% or 2%. It's almost nothing. You really learned how to learn. And one of my favorite statistics around this, in Silicon Valley, 52% of the CEOs have a liberal arts degree.
Yeah.
Why? Because it gives you different framings and different ways of looking at a problem. The most valuable people in any organization is the one that can Google things the fastest, right? It's that crazy.
Now, talking about the big elephant in the room, which is what's happening in the Bitcoin and crypto space.
Yeah.
Bankman-Fried is obviously his issue, an FTX issue. How it happened, why it happened, perhaps you can comment on that. But again, looking at it from a futurist's perspective, we were super excited 2 years ago that all of this blockchain baseline and Ethereum is coming in and Bitcoin's just going through the roof and stuff like that. I was actually fed up with the stories I was hearing every time you go to any friend's place about how much money they're making, and I'm sort of feeling complete FOMO. I'm missing out completely. Now, all of them are silent.
Yes.
But what is fundamentally going wrong there? What do we need, and what's the prognosis in terms of after this cloud moves away, what do we see on the other side?
I'm incredibly excited about crypto and Bitcoin specifically because when you look at our monetary systems, they're based on a credit-based and a debt-based system. Mm-hmm. And they were relying on an inflated a growth model. And you could borrow money and rely on the fact that growth will make your loan worth less, and you have to pay back less because growth will take over. Mm-hmm. That works until technology becomes deflationary. Mm-hmm. When they created the monetary systems of today in the 70s, they didn't realize that technology was deflationary, so they created a debt-based system. Well, a debt-based system doesn't work if you have to pay back way more later. And because technology is deflationary, it means that we have a massive issue and our current monetary systems don't work. Jeff Booth, who I think of as the chief economist of the abundance era, wrote a book called The Price of Tomorrow, where he talks about this. And the reason he's excited about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin gives you money velocity without debt. That's a very powerful concept, right? Because we have our existing monetary systems, we created them debt-based systems because you could increase money supply and borrow money and then grow your business, etc., and rely on growth to pay it back. Well, Bitcoin gives you that the advantage of that without having the deflationary aspect. Bitcoin and crypto are interesting, not because they're digital money. The US dollar is pretty much digital today, but I can program the transaction. So if I want to buy your jacket in a future world, I can basically say, I will pay you 400 dirhams for that jacket. Mm-hmm. I will send the money. It will be held in escrow. Mm-hmm. You know it's held in escrow now. You send the jacket over to me. I sign for it. And once I've taken receipt, the money's released to you. So therefore, we can do a transaction with absolutely no fraud because the transaction can be programmed in whatever way we want. That is the most incredibly powerful thing for me. It's not the digital aspect. It's the fact that we can programmatically manage monetary transactions in a really powerful way.
Tell us about the EXO economy. So you're taking a lot of these learnings and bringing it back to your own platform and sort of democratizing our community. I'm part of that, and I'm very privileged to be a part of that. Could you share your plans on that?
This shift is going to create a massive disruption, but also massive opportunity. Mm-hmm. What we're trying to do is make that transformation as seamless and painless as possible to go from the scarcity world to this abundance world. Mm-hmm. So our holy grail outcome is there's a lot of people that want to change the world, but they're stuck making money in the old economy. right? Can we create a business model and upside for people to work on this transformation? And once you can get there, then you start a flywheel and the whole thing accelerates very dramatically.
What about the metaverse? Is that internet in 1997, or do you see it differently?
No, I think there's incredible potential in the metaverse, but for very specific use cases initially. For example, if I'm a doctor doing surgery and I can use a metaverse augmented reality with a master surgeon telling me what to do, you can essentially expand the reach of an expert, right? So what internet technologies have been able to do is erase time and space and distance. So now if I'm a world famous heart surgeon, I can operate through somebody's hands around the world. This is incredibly powerful. Or if I'm replacing a really complex engine part on a plane in Ghana, you don't have to fly the expert there. You just put on the goggles. He shows you what to do, points to those things, etc. So I think this is going to facilitate a whole other world that's incredibly powerful in its own way, and it's going to spread the diffusion of technology to the edges of the world in a very powerful way. Now, there's the business models around this are going to be tricky. You need a huge amount of computational capability, which is happening anyway. I think the metaverse, in the way that Zuckerberg is thinking about it, is quite a ways away. But the specific applications around healthcare and education and so on are unbelievably profound, and the need is there today.
What are your top 2 or 3 big, outrageous, crazy predictions for the next, say, couple of years? What do we need to be looking out for?
Okay. First, I'm a huge believer in Bitcoin because we have, for the first time in human history, a true peer-to-peer monetary system that's global. So I'm very excited about Bitcoin. So buy some now would be my. I'm hugely excited about that. I'm hugely excited about solar energy and the unbelievable capability that that's going to bring. The last oil price crash was because of a 2% oversupply in the market. It's a really tightly run market. So as we have 5-10% of solar, which is doubling every year, by the way, will very quickly unwind and transform the energy marketplace in a really interesting way. The third area that's a little bit further away, but I think is the most profound, is biotech and things like CRISPR, where I can now edit my genome, and maybe I can grow hair, maybe I can do whatever. We have 10 trillion cells in the human body. Now that we can program the DNA and RNA, we can essentially, it renders a human being into a software engineering problem.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of like the ethics around that, the implications around that, the potency of that is unbelievable.
When does that inflection point come where there are enough solar energy players and the price point per kilowatt hour, which is already down to less than 50 cents, in some cases 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's already at that low level. How much further does need to go, or battery technology or distribution technology because as far as I'm concerned, if I was an oil executive, I have $4-5 trillion worth of stuff that I have invested in. So I'm going to fight like crazy for that. So
yes.
How do we break that? What's the inflection point?
Here's the good news. I'll mention 3 or 4 key topics here. In the 80s and 90s, when there were like 5 or 10 solar energy companies appearing per year, if you're a big energy company, you could buy them and shut them down.
Correct.
And they did.
Yeah.
Right. But now, because of the democratization of solar, there's 5,000 solar energy companies, and you can't shut down 5,000. You can't buy 5,000. So you just can't do it. So therefore, it's going to take on a life of its own, independent of you. You've lost control of the marketplace on that side. So that's point 1. Second point, in 2016, we had a massive inflection point in solar energy generation, where for the first time, generating energy, if you were building a new power plant, it was cheaper to build a solar facility than a fossil fuel facility. And since then, almost 100% of new power plant energy generation has been solar since 2016. So now you don't need government policy. The sheer economics of it will go, I need this many megawatts. Solar is way cheaper than anything else. Okay. In 2020, we hit a second inflection point that's even more interesting, which is since 2020, it's cheaper to build and operate a solar facility than to run the existing fossil fuel facility. So now the CapEx and OpEx of solar is cheaper than the OpEx of fossil fuels. That's a massive thing. Now, the full economic incentive is there to shut down all the fossil fuels and just run everything on solar. So that it's going to happen very fast, no matter what. And the prices keep going down. We're down to a few pennies per kilowatt now, right?
Yeah.
So, and the recent stuff in the UAE and in the region has shown how low it can go. And what's powerful is that that's doubling every year. So we will be able to deliver 100% of world energy needs with solar by 2030. Okay. Not that we will deliver all, but we can deliver all, because there's certain applications like jet engines or big freight cargo boats that you need the energy density of fuel, but you could theoretically do it. So imagine in by 2030 we could deliver 100%. But because this is doubling every year, by 2032 we can deliver 200%.
Right.
By 2034 we can deliver 400%. By 2036 we can deliver 800%. So in 15 years from today, we'll be able to deliver 8 times the amount of energy we need with solar at a price of zero. Energy is going to go to free.
Right.
Okay? And the fact that energy is free is a magical thing. Now desalination becomes free.
Yeah.
And so the positive application, now the big challenge today is storage. Because you can generate the energy, where do you store it? Well, whoever solves that problem is a trillionaire. So there's 10,000 companies focusing on storage. It's a huge possibility. The opportunities are endless. So I think what's going to happen is we are not going to rebuild, say, the energy infrastructure, say in Puerto Rico. We're going to redo it with solar microgrids. That's going to replace traditional systems in very, very rapid order.
Firstly, how do you see this part of the world with its sort of super excited population and the governments who are extremely benevolent and wanting to do lots and lots of good things versus the depressed environments in some parts of Europe and other places? If you do a survey, you have 20-30% in terms of optimism, and you have 70-80% here.
I'm super optimistic for the region. The energy transition to solar will affect the Middle East the least and the last. Why? Because the marginal cost of extraction here is so low. Okay. I'm Canadian. If you want to extract a barrel of oil out of the tar sands, it's about $45 a barrel. Okay, that's a huge, and the associated toxicity of extracting that barrel of oil is unbelievable. The tar sands will never be used, and I keep telling the Canadian government. Now, 40% of Canadian exports are oil, so the Canadian economy is toast in a few years as we move to this transition. Because the oil here in the UAE and Saudi and other places in the region is so cheap and so clean, the extraction costs are like a few dollars a barrel. It's the last place that will have a problem. Okay, all the expensive ones will fall away first, and then it becomes the last place standing in a sense. So I'm fairly optimistic about the region. There's an enormous challenge with climate change, where summer temperatures are inching up. What, it was 55 degrees this summer, right? Yeah. Let's note that if you get to 63 degrees Celsius in the summer, human beings can't go outside at 63 degrees.
Which
that's
apparently
a big challenge.
Which apparently is the trajectory by 2050, 2055.
20 years, right?
Yeah.
So this is so we have to do geoengineering at scale. The biggest thing that I'm worried about is we're not doing enough research and R&D on geoengineering, because we're going to have to do it. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So let's start doing research on it and understand what the implications are, etc.
You know, the ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed, apparently is on record stating about the metaverse, is that he's very excited about it, and he feels that we're a small country of 500,000 people, the indigenous population, and 5 million as a total population, that in the metaverse, we can be a 500 million people country. And therefore, the sense of thinking of abundance is very much there. And that's at government level.
Yes.
And I find that fascinating. We have a minister of AI, and we have a minister of happiness, and lots of women. The minister of environment and food storage is an amazing lady, Mariam Meheri. So there's a lot of positive things going on. But the stereotype in the West, and the media in the West, still sees us through that lens of we're backward and things are not really working out, and the whole of the Middle East region is just one big blob. How do we calibrate that and separate individual environments and individual things.
And when you're the richest country in the world and say you're growing up in Florida, you kind of like don't care what happens in the rest of the world in that sense. So you have to kind of ignore them. I think the best thing to do is just ignore and just keep building. And over time, the sheer capability and values and the opportunities will lift to the top. Yeah. And we're seeing that. One of my favorite examples today is there's an electric car called the Vega. Mm-hmm. It's the third fastest performing car in the world. It's 900 horsepower. Mm-hmm. Looks like a Lamborghini. It's stunning. This is being engineered, developed, designed, and built in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
That hotbed of automotive innovation. Okay. Yes. And I make the point that if you can design that car on an island of fishermen and farmers, you can do anything anywhere, right? And I love showing that model, a picture of that car to German car executives who literally can't cope. Their brains break. They just melt because, like, how could you be doing that in a place like that? We're in a world today where you can do anything anywhere. And because we have if you can take on the mindset, and Sheikh Mohammed has demonstrated this, right? There's no reason why you can't have 500 million citizens of the Emirates, like Estonia is trying to do. Give them bank accounts, give them consular services, give them all sorts of interesting capabilities, living anywhere in the world. And now you have a really powerful future for not just the country, but for the world.
This platform that you're talking on, we call it Voices of the Future. In your opinion, what are the voices that we should be looking at and thinking about to bring into this conversation and this ecosystem? So names at the top of your head that you might think of.
I think there's so much, it's so easy to go down the doom and gloom part.
Sure.
That it's really, really important to highlight the incredible positive aspects that are coming in the world. Because remember, our brains are driven by our amygdala.
Yes.
And the first time you see new technology, we relate to it as danger. And we go, oh my God, right? And I think what's incredibly exciting for me about the younger generation is they're growing up natively in that world and can bypass all of those legacy systems and ways of patterns of thinking. I think the biggest work we have to do as humanity is overcome our amygdala, where we relate to new things as danger. And then we figure out, let's stop it and figure out what to do until we figure it out. And then we take 20 years to get the benefits of, say, drones or Bitcoin or whatever.
I was thinking of people like Daniel Kraft from Exponential. Medicine.
There's Peter Diamandis, there's Daniel Kraft, there's there's some great thinkers around, Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast and slow. There's an incredible cadre of people that are driving the world forward. The systems change folks that are looking at Tony Cho, who's doing the future of cities, and regenerative placemaking. Yeah. Right. Very powerful new paradigms being introduced. There's no shortage of those. And I think what's really powerful about your Voices of the Future is you're bringing those folks in and giving them a platform and a voice to show the rest of the world that, hey, listen, we could be going for a Star Trek future.
Any takeaways, anything that we should be looking at tomorrow morning and sort of saying, these are the next steps we need to take?
I think the way I would close it out is I suggest to people that they do two things. One is take on two mindsets. One is take on a mindset of abundance and take on a mindset of gratitude, right? Just think about the idea that if you went back 1,000 years, our average lifespan was like 30 years old. You got some bacterial illness and you died. Nobody knew why you were dying. You were just dying because there were no diagnosis tools. My father often talks about the fact that, it was incredible that Aristotle and Plato were theorizing about the world, but they had no data to operate on.
Sure.
So they were like guessing at what the nature of reality was. We have so much infinitely more data coming in. You just look at the pictures coming from the recent telescopes, right? It's just magnificent how amazing the world is. I think we should just dwell in that world of optimism and gratitude. And I think if we did that, then all things become possible and easier today.
What a wonderful way to end. Salim, it's a real pleasure for me personally. We become friends. I'm working closely with yourselves. And I'm absolutely privileged to be part of this journey. So thank you very much for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Cheers.